Allan with upgrading the Ruby community.
Thank you. I presume, yeah, the mic's on. Great. Good morning. It's still morning. Good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all and just to be back after the pandemic-enforced break of the last few years and to be here in a room with Rubyists. I am so happy and stressed, but mostly happy. These are places to find me on the internet if you so wish. Thank you for the shout out, Michael, for Calm Calendar. If work-life balance for calendars is something you're interested in, you can check that out. I didn't bother putting Twitter up because I'm largely not on Twitter anymore. I want to start by acknowledging that we are currently on the land of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Boonwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. Stolen land, called Melbourne for the past 200 or so years, but known as Naarm for tens of thousands of years. I pay my respects to elders past and present and thank them for their ongoing care of culture, people, land, and water. And speaking of context, let's take stock of where we are all at right now, for we live in interesting times. Lately we've had David Heinemeier Hansson, DHH, the creator of Rails, warn us of the dangers of diversity. Really? Tom Stewart was certainly spot on when he labelled DHH as the Fox News of Ruby. If you've been taking DHH's opinion seriously, now is a very good time to stop that. And then we have Twitter, which has always had some issues, but it was, I felt, the de facto place for Rubyists to connect online. So I have a bit of a soft spot. Now it's run by billionaire man-child Elon Musk, who supposedly in the name of free speech has restricted the API, banned criticism of himself, and welcomed back a flood of white supremacists. We also are seeing significant increases in the cost of living alongside mass redundancies in many tech companies. If anyone here has been impacted by that, I'm sorry, and I hope you're doing okay. And I hope you find a new and better job soon, maybe even via conversations here at this conference. We also remain in the grips of a global COVID pandemic, while other pandemics have also been threatening. Many thanks to everyone who's wearing a mask here today, helping to keep yourself and each other safe. I really appreciate it. And then in the past week or so, we've had the devastating death toll of the earthquake impacting Syria and Turkey. There's continued violence and murder from police and military in Iran, in Myanmar, in the United States, also here in Australia, and the continued impact of wars as well. Syria's suffering there too, but my heart also goes out to those in Ukraine, Yemen, and Palestine. On this little thing, I don't know if it's going to end up to be a big deal, hopefully not. Climate change, which has had a hand in the floods in Western Australia and New Zealand this year, Eastern Australia and Pakistan last year, bushfires around the world, including Queensland this week, and just generally having a devastating toll on lives and homes and livelihoods. And I apologize for both light and heavy tones in there. It's a bit of a if you don't laugh, you cry situation, and crying is a very fair reaction. Now, many of these are starting to impact even the luckiest of us. So please spare a thought and maybe some donations to those who are less privileged. Now, I'm not here to make you depressed about the state of the world, but it is important to understand where we are all at, both individually and societally. And with that in mind, I want to talk about our Ruby community. I know the title of my session is about giving it an upgrade, but let's be clear, what we've got now is actually pretty great. And if I was to pick out some key attributes of who we are collectively, well, I'd say that Rubyists are fun. I mean, Yukihiro Matsumoto, the creator of Ruby, built the language with programmer happiness in mind. How could it not be fun? How could we not be fun? Rubyists are also caring. Through Mats's demeanor, we have the acronym MINASWAN. Mats is nice, and so we are nice. We've also had a history of bringing underrepresented and marginalized groups into Ruby through Railsbridge and Railsgirls events and opportunity tickets at conferences like this one. Also, all these events now have codes of conduct as standard to make sure we are as safe and respectful as possible. Speaking of events, Rubyists are social. And it's not just the number of Ruby conferences that happen around the world, but also the style of them. We're not just here to learn about code, although we certainly do that too. And then there's Rails camps, which began here in Australia, and of which there's been more than 50 around the world. We definitely prioritize socializing at those events. Rubyists are opinionated, which I suspect is no surprise to anyone here. And it's not just how we run our events, but also how we code with tools like Standard Ruby and RubyConf, and even just the concept of idiomatic Ruby. And sometimes, a little, Rubyists are weird, in the best way. Some of you, if you've been around a little while, may be familiar with Why the Lucky Stiff. Yes, that was his name. And Y's poignant guide to Ruby. If you haven't read it, it's online for free. I guess be warned, it is weird. It works for some people, other people just don't like it at all. So, your mileage may vary. Fun, caring, social, opinionated, weird. I think that's a pretty great combination. But I wouldn't be up here talking if I didn't think we could be even better. So what do I want us to be known for? I want Rubyists to be known for helping others, and that stretches beyond helping each other, but also to those in society more generally. I want Rubyists to be known for standing in solidarity and support with those who are oppressed and marginalized and just generally treated badly. And I want Rubyists to be known for combating the numerous systemic issues and injustices we face in society. Those aren't small things. Why should we even care? Well, let's take a step back for a second. I'm about to wade into some deep topics, and I want to make a couple of things clear before that. Firstly, I'm not going to give you all the answers. Just prepare yourself for that now. Right? Partly because I don't want to be too prescriptive. You shouldn't do things just because I say so. It'd be nice. But also, I don't know all the answers. Right? I'll provide some recommendations, but I think my bigger goal here is to get you thinking more deeply, more critically. Secondly, I feel like collectively, and especially within the Ruby community, that we're continually improving our awareness on matters like diversity and inclusion, racism, sexism, transphobia, ableism, and so on. I also want to recognize that there's always more learning to be done, and we're all on different points of that journey. So there might be some moments in my talk in which you feel I'm skipping over some fundamentals, and other points where you feel I should speed up. And it's going to vary for each of you. I would love to engage with all of you where you are at, but it's just not possible from a stage, even if I had all day. That said, I want to set out a few things as signposts on this journey, and hopefully we can at least agree on this. Firstly, we acknowledge that things aren't great for a lot of people in a lot of ways, and we want things to get better. Secondly, we acknowledge that our societies have previously been built on top of racism, sexism, slavery, war, and other terrible things. Thirdly, we agree and we acknowledge that we haven't had a proper reckoning with that history. And maybe you're going to pause on this point, but look, I have one example, the fact that pay gaps for people who aren't straight white men still exist, right? The biases and bigotry of our past are still here. And I could offer other examples, but so much of that is linked to trauma, and I'm sure some folks here would find that pretty tough. I don't want to be making anybody's day any worse if I can help it. Maybe go read the news if you need more proof. And so, given we've not properly dealt with all of this, the status quo, the default, the normal of our society is not great. And when I refer to systemic issues and injustices, this is what I'm talking about. And if we don't seek change, then what we get going forward is what we've got now. And a key reason that these systemic issues persist is because those with power are comfortable and happy and, I guess understandably, don't want to give up that power and that comfort, despite the fact that it could make a lot of people's lives so much better. I hope our own personal situations aren't too badly impacted by such issues and injustices, but even if that was the case, I want to stress that we can't just accept that doing things normally is okay, because what's normal is harmful. And so to change things, that means challenging those with power. If you're not feeling like you can agree with this, well, I hope you still appreciate the rest of my talk. But I'm not going to use my limited time to try and win you over. I don't even know if I would engage with that out in the corridors. We'll see. I'm pretty sleep deprived. And how does this all relate to the conference, to Ruby, to us? These problems, these injustices, they impact us, even within our wonderful Ruby community. And if we want to get serious about looking after Rubyists, well, then we need to address these issues at their root causes. So we need to act in ways that actually help everyone, not just Rubyists. Otherwise, I can't help but thinking that we'll just keep fighting the same Sisyphean battles again and again, papering up the cracks without fixing the foundations. This isn't an either-or situation. I'm not suggesting we ignore our local issues or even the local impacts of broader issues. But if we do want to be caring, if we do want to help others, and if we maybe want to have a positive impact on the world, then we need to look beyond our corner of the tech industry. That doesn't mean it's not overwhelming, I get it. But if we were going to go tackle these big issues, I think a fair question is how? And again, I stress, I don't have any simple answers on this. But perhaps I can provide some guidance on what has helped me, what might help you, and offer some suggestions on potential next steps. Firstly, we need to approach all of this with the right mindset. because I can guarantee if you're feeling pretty comfy right now, then you're going to come up against some very uncomfortable truths. So be prepared to be challenged and maybe even have your mind changed. Also, as you go out and learn more about all these issues, you're going to hear a whole lot of different takes. So in those cases, please don't forget the influence and bias of power and privilege. And that could well be within yourself. There's going to be very few easy solutions, if any. And there's not going to be a point where we can relax and think, great, everything's solved. I mean, I hope there is a point, but I don't think we're going to get there. So you'll need to lean into this sentiment from Maya Angelou: do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better. If your journey through this is anything like mine, there's going to be a lot of learning again and again about what's actually better, and then adjusting actions accordingly. And with this mindset, the next step is to gain awareness, which means a whole lot of listening. And when you're considering a particular set of issues, listen to those with lived experiences. That is, those who are confronted personally by the injustices and issues. You wouldn't ask a white guy about racism. You wouldn't ask a straight person about homophobia. This is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. There's also a place for experts as well, but be mindful of who gets to define whether someone is an expert, and generally just err towards those who are suffering the injustices. There's also a distinction between listening and asking. People may not want to share their own experiences, their own trauma, especially just for the benefit of others. So instead of expecting people, whether they be your colleagues, your friends, or others, to explain everything to you, find a good book, or a documentary, or a podcast, or however you best take in new ideas. I have some recommended reading. I'll post to social media, to Mastodon, and I'll post it to the Ruby Australia Slack after this. Books are how I learn, so that's really what I'll be recommending. Also, be wary of Ruby exceptionalism and tech exceptionalism generally. Right? Tech folks, we have a habit of seeing a problem and trying to fix it without maybe having a deep understanding. And often that can make things worse. So please don't be that person. Now, I've come across an analogy with regards to racism lately, and I feel it's kind of appropriate in a broader sense as well. So Beverly Daniel Tatum writes about racism in society as a travelator, the horizontal escalators that you might find at an airport, and if you stand on the travelator, it just takes you there. You don't need to do anything. So she's referring to society is racist by default, and if you don't do anything, you're going to be drawn to racism. It's the whole status quo. And if you really want to lean into being racist, well, I guess that's walking along the travelator in the direction it's going. Don't do that. However, if you want to stop being racist, that actually requires energy. You need to turn around and you need to walk or run even the other way. And Tatum talks about this active movement as being anti-racist, a term that's cropping up more and more these days, particularly thanks to Black Lives Matter activists. And it's this kind of active behavior that I'm seeking with regards to dealing with racism, but also with all of the things. We can't just be aware of systemic problems. We need to take action against them. We live in a flawed society, and expecting the comfortable status quo to lead us to a solution isn't going to happen. This is also why sitting on the fence and remaining neutral and not wanting to be political in such matters is actually harmful. And to reinforce a comment earlier about not treating ourselves, us tech people, as inspired experts, in almost every case, unless you yourself have that lived experience, you shouldn't be the person driving these actions, right? The experts, the people with lived experience that we've been listening to, probably have recommendations on the better ways to combat inequality, injustice, and so forth. So follow their lead rather than trying to be a leader yourself. Okay, so don't treat Rubyists as special, don't treat them as experts, and here I am on stage, a Rubyist without all that much expertise on the topic. I realize that's a bit of a contradiction, and I don't feel especially comfortable with it either. I guess you can all make your own judgment at the end whether I should have even been up here. But with that acknowledgement, let's get stuck into some practical actions, shall we? Now, I considered looking at this from a code perspective, because I know that's super practical and easy to dive into, but it felt wrong, because we're not dealing with code, we're dealing with people. So let's focus as much as we can on people. Not that the way we code doesn't have an impact, but all right, fine. I'll give you one technical thing to consider, but it's still not code, it's servers. In particular, the energy they consume, because the internet is made of servers and the internet is a significant contributor to carbon emissions. Now, these days, we can usually find out how data centers are powered. So if you can, be more picky about where you host your apps and choose data centers or regions where renewable energy is the primary source. That said, we're generally dealing with Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. And in all cases, their ethics are problematic at best. Actually, in all three cases, their actions actively harm people. So let's reach back to that travelator analogy. If you know these companies have terrible records, but you use their services anyway, then are you just standing on that travelator being drawn towards acceptance of treating warehouse workers inhumanely, towards removing immigrant children from their parents, towards supporting fossil fuel companies and their misinformation campaigns? I'm well aware that disentangling yourself from their services is extremely difficult, but still, you need to understand the cost of that convenience and figure out how it sits on your conscience. A challenge to you is, what other actions can you take to offset the terrible behavior of these giant companies? How can you take your own steps on that travelator in the opposite direction? Is it donating regularly? And I stress regularly because you pay these companies regularly too. Donating regularly to community groups fighting such terrible behavior? Or could you send some money to the strike funds supporting workers at these companies? YouTube workers are currently striking as of this week. Think of this kind of like carbon offsets, but you're offsetting other things instead. And now, also, I know offsets are a flawed system too. Have I mentioned I don't have all the answers? If you have other suggestions about this, please find me in the breaks. I'd love to chat more about it, hear more ideas. And I highlighted donating before because generally, not always, but generally, we developers get paid pretty well. And I would hope we can afford to be generous. Also, money is quite a direct form of power, but also where you send that money matters. Try and get a sense of which organizations do the most meaningful work, whether they're sustainable, whether they're actually changing things or just papering up the cracks. And again, this comes back to awareness, it comes back to listening to those with lived experience. When it comes to tackling racism and colonization, one group I'm happy to recommend for those here in Victoria is Pay the Rent, paytherent.net.au. And they are an organisation that distributes funds to First Nations groups who need it. And those groups then go and do important work in their own communities. The admin work of this organisation is done by allies, but the decisions around who is supported is totally driven by First Nations folks, i.e. the people who have lived experience of racism and the ongoing effects of colonisation. Now, Pay the Rent recommend people chip in every month with a target 1% of your salary. I think that's a great start. I know there's people in this room who already do this. As a next step, I'd love to hear of businesses taking a similar approach. 1% of profits, hell, 1% of revenue. Let's get serious about this. It's also important to note that at least in the case of Pay the Rent, it's not a tax-deductible donation, and that is fine, because we're not here to do this to feel good. We're not here to do this to pay less tax. We're here to do this to make actual change. Also related to money, a bit more of a one-to-one kind of situation, talk about your salaries. Talk about them with your colleagues, talk about them with your peers at other companies. Sharing what we all earn gives us all more awareness and more power to negotiate. It can also importantly help highlight any salary imbalances, especially when it comes to gender and race. Essentially, it gives us all power to push back against the status quo. Now, I can't offer a salary of my own as an example, because I'm a contractor. But as one limited data point, sure, okay. At the moment, I earn a daily rate, when I am working, of $1,300 excluding GST. And that's for writing Ruby, because that's what I'm actually good at. And I've got over a decade of experience with it. Now, there's a whole lot of nuance we could go into there. I realize that. I've got other topics to get through. We should probably have a whole separate talk about salaries and contract rates and so forth. Again, very happy to have conversations out in the hallways afterwards. This next suggestion I have was a bit of a journey for me, so it might be for you too, but essentially, join your union. Now, for those of us who live here in Australia, that union is called Professionals Australia. That's a very bland name, doesn't even have union in it. It's just how it is. Now, I'm both a little bit happy and a little bit embarrassed to admit that for a long time I wasn't sure about unions. I understood that they stood up for workers, but they also seemed to be frowned upon by others, and I thought it was maybe for only some industries and not others, and are strikes good, are they bad? I feel like I missed a key bit of education somewhere along the way. Also, I wasn't sure that if I joined, does that mean I would need to strike? What does that even look like in our industry? And for me as a contractor, so many questions. I'm still not an authority on the topic, but here's where I've landed. Strikes are a tool of last resort. Unions are largely a tool for very much good, for standing in solidarity, for distributing power amongst workers, instead of giving too much control to employers. Also, I've realized that the people in power are best served by us not knowing much about unions. So all the media and so forth is going to be influenced that way as well. So that's probably why I didn't know as much as I wanted to. For anyone wondering, what have the unions ever done for us? Here's a very incomplete list. 2-day weekends, I'm a fan. 8-day weeks, well, I don't even know how that works. 8-hour days. Paid parental leave, it's very good. Reasonable retirement ages and pensions, super important. Occupational health and safety regulations, definitely. Paid holidays, I'm a contractor, but I like the idea in theory. Minimum wages and pay increases. Just recently in Australia, paid leave for domestic violence situations. Absolutely essential. Also, the right to not be sacked if you're pregnant, if you just got married, or if you're just simply unwell. You might think that that's totally normal, but it wasn't once upon a time. And it's for groups like unions that we have to thank for that. Now, particularly amongst a lot of tech companies, these conditions, yeah, they're normal, they're great. They're absolute minimum, but that isn't always the case. And especially at the moment, we're seeing mass layoffs, which are definitely impacting workers, but are they impacting management? Are bonuses being removed? Are executive wages being reduced? Are executives even being laid off? Which is all to say, we might have it good now, but we shouldn't become complacent. And we also shouldn't be alone in having decent working conditions. And perhaps you don't need the support of a union right now. Wonderful. That doesn't mean you shouldn't sign up. Supporting your union with your membership dues means that they can provide more support to more of our peers. I have not been in need of their services thus far myself, but I have heard enough anecdotes to know that Professionals Australia do care and they do help. Also, we're often directed to take work issues to HR. But at the end of the day, no matter how good the people within that department might be, HR is there to serve the business more than the employees. So perhaps consider a union as your voice when HR fails you. Separately, for those of you who run businesses and employ others, I hope you're feeling a little bit challenged right now. Maybe thinking about some discussions around power and who should have how much. And I hope you're considering ways in which you can maybe reduce that power, maybe be a little more cooperative. And that's actually one thing I'd love to know more about, is building businesses as cooperatives and what that can look like within the tech space. If I don't know, so if anyone has experience with this, come find me afterwards or send me an email. I'd love to hear more. And for anyone else who's equally interested, please do investigate. Again, I don't have all the answers. I do a bunch of reading and listening and educating of myself, still work in progress. And no one person can provide all the answers anyway. But I also don't think that not knowing the answers should stop us from having these conversations. And they need to happen in the open, so everyone benefits. I was lucky enough to see Rebecca Giblin and Cory Doctorow speak earlier this week at ACMI. And Rebecca made the comment that with these systemic issues, there are no individual solutions, only collective solutions. Working together is the only way through. So that's the last challenge, really. If you grapple with these topics and you find ways of making progress, then please share what you're doing. Right? I know that comes with challenges around ego and other people thinking you're grandstanding and the whole tall poppy stuff. It's not easy, but it's worth doing. If you're not sure how to begin these conversations, start by sending me an email. I'd love to hear from you and we can try and figure this stuff out together. We come from a culture of open source, of sharing by default, and I think that is essential for helping us all learn and grow together. Okay. I'm almost done, whoever's timer that was. I've got two more thoughts, two changes to what I think the Ruby community should be, and then it'll be lunchtime. The first is, I think it's time to retire Minaswan. I'm not questioning whether Mats is nice. I don't know Mats personally. But rather, being nice is the problem. Being nice means not rocking the boat. Being nice means not challenging the status quo. Being nice means accepting systemic inequality. Being nice serves those with power and lets those without power suffer. Sometimes we need to rock the boat. Sometimes we need to make people feel uncomfortable. We need to actively fight against inequality. Indeed, things aren't going to get any better unless we do. Harking back to that travelator analogy again, being nice is standing still and polite on the travelator, letting it take you to a terrible destination. Being kind, that's different, that's great. Caring, wonderful, but enough with just being nice. And my other point is no more heroes, especially no more tech heroes. And again, nothing against maths, but it's more that humans are fallible and corruptible by power and influence, and also just sometimes plain wrong. So don't give them that pedestal. No more heroes. Not maths, definitely not DHH, but also not good people, right? Like Aaron Patterson or Sarah May or Andre Arco or Evan Phoenix or Sandy Metz or Coraline, who's going to talk here on this stage tomorrow morning. And certainly not me. I'm just as flawed and fallible as the next person. But beyond those two changes, I think our foundations of this community are solid. To me, the desire for us to help others, to stand in solidarity, to challenge injustice, to be honest, they already feel like things that Rubyists are on board with. And that's why I feel comfortable sharing this with you all. But I still hope I've offered some challenges today, and I've got you thinking a bit more deeply about how we engage with the world. We should keep being fun and social and opinionated and weird. And most importantly, we should keep caring for each other. It's just that each other needs to be a bit of a broader consideration. Let's aim not just to be good developers or good colleagues, but also to be good citizens, to act in solidarity. Thank you.